I titled this sermon, Religious Liberalism, or Unitarian Universalism, Religious Liberalism, not Religious Libertarianism. If you are a political libertarian this morning, don't start drafting your angry email just yet. I'm not talking this morning about political libertarianism. I do want to distinguish between religious liberalism and religious libertarianism. As we begin the new year on this very first Sunday of 2015, let's consider together just who we are and who we want to be. We Unitarian Universalists are religious liberals. We are not religious libertarians. Hang with me. My colleague, Reverend Kimmy Regal, writes, to be a liberal, according to my favorite scripture, Merriam-Webster, is to be open-minded, is to be free from the constraints of dogmatism and authority, is to be generous and to believe in the basic goodness of humankind. Religion is defined as that which binds us back or reconnects us to that which is ultimately important. Thus, religious liberals are those who are connected through generosity and openness to the most important aspects of life. End quote. I have not always been a religious liberal. There are a lot of stories like mine in our faith. I was raised in a conservative religious tradition, but lost faith in the God of my youth. I found in Unitarian Universalism a religion which seemed almost completely different than the fundamentalism I knew. My first worship service in a Unitarian Universalist congregation was a born-again moment for me. Picture me as Julie Andrews dancing in the fields. Or don't, if that's too disturbing. At least the hair works. As a preacher, it was especially freeing to realize that I could preach from the Bible, but also from poetry, from science, from essays and texts, and texts from every world religion. The hills were alive with truth. I did not understand at the time that I was living out the story of liberal faith in general. Liberal faith, whether it's Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Unitarian Universalist, is always born out of a more conservative tradition. So, in some ways, liberal religion is at its heart a reaction against something else. The Oxford English Dictionary, not Kimmy's favorite, but I'm sure she would like it too, defines religious liberals as, quote, those members of a religion which hold opinions broader than those in accordance with its commonly accepted standards of orthodoxy, end quote. So, out of the cauldron of hellfire and brimstone Calvinist Christianity in the 1700s and 1800s in the United States came Universalism, a religion that preached love and unity and the notion of a God who is loving enough to reconcile everyone unto God's self in the end. The Universalist doctrine that there was no hell was radical 300 years ago, but it was only radical. In fact, it only made sense because so many people were preaching that there was a hell. A lot of us are attracted to Unitarian Universalism in the beginning because of what this liberal faith does not have. Belief in hell and a punishing God. Tests of right belief. But if all we have to say is what we do not have, if all we can say to a world that is in need of love and healing is at least we're not them, then we are irrelevant. That is the shadow side of liberal faith. In part because of all that we're reacting against. And whether or not you grew up in a conservative faith, we as a whole often are reacting against fundamentalism in our culture. We have developed an allergy to authority of almost any kind. We have a bad habit of not trusting either ministers or our own elected lay leaders. It's so rampant in Unitarian Universalism that just a few years ago, a committee within the Unitarian Universalist Association issued a 100-page report entitled, Who's in Charge Here? The complex relationship between ministry and authority. Spoiler alert, there's no answer. And I get it. Frankly, I know that it's never going to go away. It's an issue to be paid attention to. to be managed but not to be fixed. It is at the foundation of our faith to question authority. And our ancestors earned that tendency. Our faith was born in the Protestant Reformation, after all, the Radical Reformation. But if we nurse that part of our faith at the expense of trust and community, we will no longer be religious liberals. Instead, we'll become religious libertarians, people who insist on an absolute individual freedom at all times, and that anyone who values community over individualism is oppressing individual freedom. Individualism can become its own fundamentalism. If that is all we are, what do we hope to say to a world in need of a message of healing and hope? Come join us, we won't tell you what to do. That is religious libertarianism. It's what's behind the popular joke that leading Unitarian Universalists is like herding cats. We think it's cute, but I'm not such a fan of that joke anymore. Cat herders, whether there's lay leaders or ministers, get scratched and bloodied. Reverend Marilyn Sewell improved on the image of herding cats by switching to music. She said Unitarian Universalists tend to be more comfortable as soloists, but being part of a religious community, or any community for that matter, calls us to function as gifted musicians playing together in an orchestra. So here we are, this magnificent motley orchestra, some of us beaten up by past traditions. But we have joined a new to us, but hundreds of years old tradition in this liberal faith. What is the music that we play together? I figure that's the most important question for just about any religion. What do we have to say to one another and to a hurting world when times get tough? What's our saving message? And we religious liberals do have a saving message. We say that truth is still being revealed, and that we have a duty to seek it together. Some religions seek truth only in texts that are thousands of years old. We look there too. But in opposition to the idea that the revelation of truth is limited to one book or one set of books or to a specific historic time period, religious liberals believe that revelation is ongoing, that new truths are always unfolding, and that old truths that we've known for a long time can be either discounted or found in new forms. The children's choir sang a Taylor Swift song, for heaven's sakes. Even in Taylor Swift, we might find the truth. So seldom. She's never done anything to me, and I shouldn't have said that. So liberal religionists look also to modern texts, not just ancient texts, but to modern texts, and to earth itself, and to one another, to find meaning. That demands a lot from us, because most of us have our favorite sources of truth. In fact, some say we have a long way to go to fulfill our ideal of real religious pluralism. In 2007, the theologian Paul Razor delivered the John Murray Distinguished Lecture at the Unitarian Universalist Association's General Assembly. He called for, in that lecture, what he called a deeper universalism that accepts differences rather than trying to erase them. That's an important distinction. There is a liberalism that seeks to boil down all our theologies into this bland roux in which no one is offended because no one ever says anything that could offend anyone. Razor said, "We claim to be comfortable with difference and particularity, but we're not. We still too often complain when someone speaks in their own language if it is not our language. We want speakers to translate everything into some sort of lowest common denominator language, a way of speaking that makes the listener comfortable, but often distorts the speaker's meaning and discourages particularity and depth." Razor said, "What's better is when each of us can speak the truth in our own language. If God language is important to us, we should feel free to use it. If science is our path, we should feel free to use scientific language in speaking truth." Razor spoke highly of classroom discussions, He was a professor, organized according to that principle. He said, we wanted people to say what they meant and speak out of their own deep identity. For liberal religion to work, we have to take seriously sources of truth from other people that may not be our own. So we try to hear the voice of God in one another's voices. At our best, humanists and atheists treat theists, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim with respect and vice versa. In part because that's the kind of world we religious liberals want to build. That gets tricky every now and then. But it is essential, so we keep at it. As we Unitarian Universalists have said in one of our founding principles, we believe in a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. But religious liberalism is more than just a search for truth. We also assert that each of us has a moral responsibility to work for a more loving and just world. This is the point at which libertarianism gets in the way of religious liberalism. The 20th century Unitarian theologian James Luther Adams wrote, "Idolatry in the name of individualism rejects responsibility for the character of a society that requires or at least comfortably tolerates the built-in poverty of almost one-third of the populace, not to speak of the poverty of underdeveloped countries. What began as a liberating individualism has become a pervasive conglomeration of power, an oppressive idolatry of individualism, a new absolute." In other words, he said, religious liberalism is called to do more than just insist on the freedom of individuals. We call ourselves to the work of creating the world we pray for. Adams wrote, "Freedom, justice, and love require a body as well as a spirit. We do not live by spirit alone. A purely spiritual religion is a purely spurious religion. It is one that exempts its believer from surrender to the sustaining, transforming reality that demands the community of justice and love. This sham spirituality, far more than materialism, is the great enemy of religion." So we're called to do the work of justice and love. But what happens when that work gets tiresome and long? What does religious liberalism have to say to us then? This, I believe, is our strongest point. Not only our strongest, but our most important. Adams said it this way, "Liberalism holds that the resources, divine and human, that are available for the achievement of meaningful change justify an attitude of ultimate optimism. This view does not necessarily involve immediate optimism." End quote. So as religious liberals, our faith is born in protest. Originally, protest of a top-down authoritarianism of the ancient church. We have a keen eye for injustice, and when we see it, we work for its repair. But how we come to that work means everything. If we simply protest every wrong and offer no hope, we're no longer religious liberals. We're in constant danger of becoming cynical political liberals. It is important that we approach our work with the optimism that in all situations the resources available to us are enough. Maybe the world won't change as quickly as we'd like, but religious liberalism is rooted in the notion, preached by Unitarian minister Theodore Parker 200 years ago, that the moral arc of the universe is indeed long. It takes a long time to change things, but that the arc bends toward justice. And so, we religious liberals need not be jostled by every hateful politician or tough election. We set our hearts on the goal and we continue to work. As James Luther Adams said, religious liberalism is not dead and will not die. Having once got into the world, the liberal spirit will blow where it listeth. It may, along with the scientific spirit, be driven underground, but only in appearance. Some years ago, there was a push in Unitarian Universalism to come up with an elevator speech. A few sentences to say to someone, short enough to be delivered on an elevator ride, when they ask you, so what is Unitarian Universalism all about anyway? They're more likely to say Unity Universal or something like that. But I was once asked that question about midnight on an elevator by a young man who was holding a baby bottle in one hand and a glass of whiskey in the other. People need messages of hope. It's easy to talk about what we don't believe. But I wonder if instead of talking about what we don't believe, we had a better idea of what we do believe. What if we said we believe people are capable of finding the truth in lots of different places, and so we don't impose creeds or tests of belief? We believe we have a responsibility to work for a just and loving world, so we do a lot of social justice work. And we believe that everything we need to pursue truth and to do the work is available to us here and now. And so we're optimistic that things can change for the better. Religious liberalism is more than just a set of we don't believes. And so I hope that in this new year, we'll renew our call to justice and love and to the work, and to remember that the resources are always available to us in one another and in that which is beyond one another. Amen.